Okay, 7th grade, so this reading is going to go back to the 6 kingdoms that we learned about at the beginning of the year that all living things could be broken into. So remember we had bacteria, eubacteria, and then we went into plantae and amelia, and then we broke it down to more into fungi and all those kind of things. So this is what this reading is going to be talking about. The reading gets pretty deep, but don't worry, I'll help you through the questions. And it's official. I'm old. I'm going to put my glasses on. All right. Classifying kingdoms. The science of grouping and naming organisms is called taxonomy. Today, scientists use a 6-kingdom system of grouping living things. Any living thing that can be grouped into one of those kingdoms. A kingdom is a group of organisms with similar characteristics and ways of finding food. All animals belong to kingdom Animalia. Each kingdom is divided into 2 smaller categories called phyla based on their differences. The phyla are divided into 2 groups of similar organisms called classes, and the classes are further subdivided into orders. Each order is divided into families, and each family into genuses. Finally, the genus is divided into species. In the past, the names that people gave plants and animals changed, depending on what language they spoke and what part of the world that they lived in. It became necessary to give each organism a unique name so that biologists would understand each other, where they were here in America or over in Africa. If they spoke different languages, they still needed to be talking about the same organism. So they had to come up with a way. So when they named something, that particular species had that specific name no matter where they were in the world, and you didn't call an animal all these different names. So when you spoke about it as a scientist, then everybody knew exactly what you were talking about. During the 1700s, a Swedish botanist named Carolus Linnaeus proposed a method to name every living thing, even the undiscovered ones. He called his naming system binomial nomenclature, which means a 2-word naming system. Remember that bi means 2. Each organism has its first name, the genus to which it belongs, and uses its species name for the second name, which usually describes some feature or region where it's discovered. The name is written in Latin because that was the only language that was unchanging. We call this an organism's scientific name, and we use it to refer to a member of a species. For example, humans belong to the species sapiens, meaning wise, and to the genus Homo, which means man or the same. Thus, man's specific name is Homo sapien. Of these 6 kingdoms of living things, the largest is kingdom Animalia. The animal kingdom is made of multicellular, eukaryotic, heterotrophic organisms that feed on other organisms. They are made of cells containing a nucleus and organelles, but do not have structures for changing sunlight into energy, nor do they have cell walls for protection. The kingdom Plantae is the next largest kingdom on Earth. Plants are multicellular, eukaryotic, autotrophic. Remember, that means that they can make their own food through photosynthesis, and they have those chloroplasts to do that within their cells. And they're able to move from place to place. Unable to move from place to place. They are not able to move from place to place, which is why they have those large vacuoles to store large amounts of water. Their cells have thick cell walls and a nucleus and organelles. The kingdom fungi is made up of organisms that can be unicellular or multicellular, heterotrophic, and unable to move about. They consume dead and decaying matter and are known as decomposers. Fungi have cells with a cell wall, a nucleus, and organelles. Kingdom Protista is made up of either single-celled or multicellular organisms that are eukaryotic. Some protists are heterotrophs and others are autotrophs. Their cells have a cell membrane, nucleus, and organelles. Bacteria are divided into two kingdoms because of their different chemical composition and habits. Kingdom bacteria are the unicellular prokaryotes that live in fresh or salt water and which have no nucleus and no organelles. They only have cytoplasm and a cell wall that encloses it. Kingdom archaea includes unicellular prokaryotes that live in extremely hot, salty, or low oxygen environments. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and skip over to the next reading section for traits and heredity, and I'll go ahead and read both of these, and then I'll go back and work out your questions with you after this video. All right, so here we go. I'm on page 59, traits and heredity. All living things have traits, which are characteristics that are inherited from parents. These traits are carried in genes found in an organism's DNA. DNA is a molecule that is found in the nucleus of all cells and that is copied and passed on to offspring. The different forms of genes that can be passed on to offspring are called alleles. Remember, we talked about alleles when we were doing your Punnett squares and back when we were doing our SpongeBob papers. Most animals look like their parents because of the traits that they inherit. Humans inherit their height, eye color, hair color, and whether they are right or left-handed. Animals inherit their size, their coloration, and many of their behaviors. Plants, too, pass on traits to their offspring. Some organisms reproduce asexually, simply by budding or fission. The offspring of these organisms have the same trait as the parent. Bacteria, sponges, and protists reproduce asexually. The DNA of the offspring is identical to the parent. Remember, in asexual reproduction, there's only one parent. So if there's only one parent, then those offspring have to be identical to the parent cell. Organisms that reproduce sexually, such as plants and animals, produce offspring that have some genes from each parent. The combination of genes determine which traits each offspring will have, and explain why each offspring is not identical to its brothers and sisters. Some of these traits are dominant, meaning that they will be expressed if the allele is present in the gene. Other traits are recessive, meaning that they only show up if the dominant allele is not present. In humans, black hair and brown eyes are dominant. Blonde hair and blue eyes are recessive traits. So, if either parent passes on an allele for brown hair, the offspring will have brown hair. Only when neither parent passes on the dominant gene for brown hair will the offspring have blonde hair. Scientists who study heredity have learned that they can predict the traits of offspring or sexually reproducing organisms based on the genes of the parents. When two organisms with recessive traits are crossed, the offspring will have a recessive trait. When two parents with pure dominant traits are crossed, the offspring will have the dominant trait. When two parents with pure dominant traits are crossed, the offspring will have the dominant trait. Sorry, repeating myself. Parents with one dominant and one recessive allele will produce offspring with both dominant and recessive traits. A Punnett square is a tool we use to predict outcomes of genetic crosses. Remember the Punnett square we used, and we filled in that Punnett square from top and to the side. Remember, we had one parent on the top, one parent on the side, and we used it just like a multiplication chart. So you're going to take whatever's in the top, whatever's on the side, and pair it up and put it in that square. And they've given you an example of one down here at the bottom of the page, and I'll go back through that with you in a second. All right, a Punnett square is a tool used to predict the outcomes of genetic crosses. It is a diagram used to show all the possible combinations of a phenotype. Now remember that a phenotype is what it looks like, so I'm getting ahead of myself. The abbreviations used to make up traits make up the genotype. So remember, the genotype are the letters or the alleles. It's what do the genes say. The appearance of the organism is its phenotype. So remember, the phenotype is what does the genotype look like? So the genotype is going to be the letters or the alleles, and then the phenotype is what would that look like? In the Punnett square pictures, the letters represent the genotype, while the description is the phenotype. The capital T stands for the dominant tall gene, and the lowercase t stands for the recessive short gene. Since one parent has two lowercase t genes, it's short. The other parent has one dominant capital T and one recessive lowercase t gene, so it is tall. So because one of the parents, that second parent, has one dominant and one recessive, remember that the dominant is going to hide the recessive, so that means that one parent's going to be tall. The first parent that has two lowercase t's, those are both recessive. So remember, the dominant does not show up when both alleles are recessive. Its offspring have a 50% chance of being tall and a 50% chance of being short, shown by the combinations in the Punnett square. So I'm going to move my camera and look at this square for just a second, guys, and switch. Okay, so remember that when you're looking at a Punnett square, you're going to use it like a multiplication chart. So this is the tall parent, so capital T is tall, lowercase is short or recessive, and that dominant is going to overtake the recessive. On this side, this other parent has two recessive alleles. There's not a dominant one to take over. So this is the only time that a recessive trait is going to show up. Both of them have to be recessive, because if there was a dominant, it would take over. So now remember, you're going to have to fill one of these out in a minute on your own. So remember, it's going to work just like a multiplication chart. So you're going to take the capital T from the top and the lowercase t from the side, and that's what goes in this square. Over here in this square, you're going to take the lowercase t from the top, lowercase t from the side. So you would have two recessive traits. Here, top, capital, side, lowercase. Here again, lowercase, lowercase. Okay, so what this shows is, remember, this is heterozygous because they're different. Heterozygous is dominant, so it's going to be tall. These are the same, homozygous recessive, so it'll be short. Heterozygous dominant, so it'll be tall. Homozygous, because they're the same, recessive, so it'll be short. So half of them are going to be tall, 50%. Half of them are going to be short, 50%.